Okay, today's demo is going to be on a square edge bowl. Now I'll take a piece of solid walnut about 3 inches thick and we will put it on a lathe and we will turn a square edged bowl. There's several different ways that you can do this. The way I'm going to demonstrate today is going to be through the use of sacrificials on the edge. So you essentially turn a round edged bowl and then you cut the sacrificials off to make it square. It's a little bit easier in some respects than just turning the wings by themselves. It has advantages and disadvantages to this method. But that's the method that I'll show you today. And we'll get started with that in just a minute. To start our square edge bowl, we'll start with a perfectly square piece of walnut, about 8.5 inches square, and about almost 3 inches thick. Now, the important thing about it being square, if you're going to do a square edge bowl, you need to start with a piece that's square, or it'll cause you all kind of trouble down the road. Now, there's two ways that you can do a square edge bowl. You can just go ahead and take your square, put it on the lathe, and begin to turn it. And when you're turning the wings on your square edge bowl, you're turning a great deal of air, which complicates the process. It's a great deal harder to do that. Now, there's a way to cheat and wind up with exactly the same result. What we're going to do is take our square piece that's actually going to be our bowl, and then we're going to take some sacrificials. And we will glue these sacrificials up to our piece. Then we'll scribe a circle that will just go just outside the corners. So we'll have a complete circumference out here on our sacrificial. And now we can put it on the lathe and we can turn it as though it were round. And we're not turning air. And we can completely shape the wings on our bowl without ever turning air. And then when we're finished, we simply cut the sacrificials off. And I'll show you how I do that as well. Now, most of you already know how to glue up, so I'm not going to show that on the video. But once I've got it glued up, we'll scribe our circle, we'll cut it out with a bandsaw, and then we'll be ready to actually start turning. Okay, we have our sacrificials glued to our square bowl blank. And I've scribed a line for the actual diameter of the sacrificial, and I've marked the center so I know where to drill the 3/8 inch hole for the worm screw on the chuck that I'll be attaching this to. So all I have to do now is go to a bandsaw and cut this outside the line. I'm not trying to make this perfectly round on the bandsaw, I'll do that on the lathe. So I need my cut line to be outside my pencil line. And drill the hole in the center. Now, the normal hole size that you drill for a worm screw is 3/8 of an inch. Now, if you're drilling into harder wood, you can make it a little easier on yourself by using a slightly larger drill bit. It makes the blank go onto the worm screw a little bit easier, and it still holds just as well. If you're turning very hard wood, it's very, very difficult to get it onto that worm screw with only a 3/8 hole. So I normally drill one slightly larger than the 3/8. And then we'll do that in the next segment. Okay, now I have the blank cut out round now, and I have my hole drilled in the center. The next step is to simply put it on the lathe and start turning it. And we'll do that in the next segment. Okay, we've got our blank completely glued up, and we've got our sacrificials around here so we can turn our square edge bowl. Now, the first thing we have to do is actually get it mounted on the chuck. Now, to do that, we'll use a worm screw. That just goes in the chuck. All chucks come with worm screws, and I find them to be much easier to use than faceplates, which you could also use on this. Now, once you have your worm screw installed, you just simply screw the blank onto the worm screw. Now, you can use your chuck key to hold it, and it'll make it a little easier to install. Now, once you get it completely screwed on, you need to make sure that all four of your chuck jaws are in contact with the blank. So it's going to turn fairly balanced. And if it's not, if you don't have all four jaws in contact with your workpiece, it's going to cause you problems when you start to turn. Now, before we can actually start turning this, we have to make one more determination. From this position, we can turn the outside of the bowl. But we have to have a way to turn it around and hold it back on a chuck so we can turn the inside of the bowl. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do that. You could cut a recess. You could cut a tenon. But in both cases, you lose a little working room, especially if you cut a tenon, because it takes up part of the thickness of the bowl, and you'll eventually have to cut it off. Now, there's another way that you can do it. Because of the way I like to turn bowls, I like to put an O-ring in the bottom of it, and I like to have the bottom flat. The recess is not a bad thing, it's just I choose to do it a different way. Now, what I can do with this is to bring up my tailstock, use a reverse chucking adapter, which has a number 2 Morse taper, and on the other end it has the threads that will fit my chuck. Now, if I can put that in my tailstock and add a second chuck, I can install a sacrificial and now I can actually glue that sacrificial onto the bottom of my bowl. And then after I've turned the bottom of this bowl, I can turn it around, put the sacrificial in a chuck, and use that to support it while I turn the inside. Now, there's a couple of different ways to install sacrificials. You can glue them all, like I'm doing. You can you could use double-sided tape. There's a couple of other methods that people use to attach sacrificials. Personally, I prefer glue. Once I finish turning the inside of the bowl, I simply turn the thing back around and I can hold it in jumbo jaws and cut off the sacrificial. So there's a lot of different ways that you can hold the blank, and I'm just going to use the sacrificial method. Now we're going to have to let that sit and dry for a while, and we'll be back in just a little bit and we'll see the next step. Okay, we have finished gluing up our sacrificial. Now we're going to take off the secondary chuck. The first thing you do is drop the tension by releasing the tailstock. Then you can just loosen the chuck a little bit and the whole thing will slide back. Now, we're actually ready to start turning our bowl now. And I'm going to change the camera position and we will get that set up, and we can see how to actually turn our square edge bowl. Okay, our first trick is going to be to turn our sacrificial round and get it down fairly close to the corners on our square edge piece. And we'll do that with a bowl gouge. Now, you may be able to see that there's a bit of difference between the position in the corners. This one is a little bit closer than the other three. And what that means is I didn't have this completely centered when I put it on the worm screw. But that's okay, really. These are going to get cut off when we're finished anyway. So we'll just have a slightly larger diameter. The next step is going to be to start actually shaping the bottom of the bowl. And we'll do that in just a second. Okay, we're set up now to start actually shaping the bottom. And we're not going to start close to the sacrificial. We're going to start out here and we're going to knock off this corner. We're going to try to get most of this section of the walnut round. So we knock off these corners and then work out into the sacrificials and just get a shape on the bottom. And we'll do that with a bowl gouge. Now we have most of the wings established on the bowl, and we've got a good curve on the bottom. Now we're going to keep working this up through the sacrificial. The front of the sacrificial is the front of the bowl, so we're only going to have about 3/8 of an inch at the most of the sacrificial left where it's round. It's all going to be taken off in this thickness down to about here. There's an awful lot of wood. It'll take a while to get it all removed. So I'm just going to keep working this and try to establish the wings in exactly the position that I want. Now we're getting a good shape. You can see hopefully from the view that you have that we're clearly establishing all four wings, and we're working our way toward the thickness that we want. The next step is going to be to actually turn the sacrificial round and cut for the O-ring. We're going to have to do that now before we turn it around. And then we won't have to worry about trying to do it later. Square edge bolts don't go in jumbo jaws very well, so it's going to make it much more difficult to cut the O-ring later. So I'm going to turn the sacrificial round, and then we'll cut the slot for the O-ring. Okay, we now have 2.5 for our sacrificial. Now, what I need to do then, since this is 2.5 and I need 3 inches, I'll just come out 1/4 of an inch from the sacrificial, and that will tell me where I need to be for the sacrificial. And we'll just eyeball that 1/4 of an inch. And now this will be the position for a O-ring. Now the O-ring is 3 inches in diameter, the outside diameter. So it will fit over this sacrificial. And then we just cut into the walnut. And then when the sacrificial comes off, we'll still have the groove for our O-ring. Now we need to be a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. Still not quite wide enough. A little bit more. Now that's a pretty good fit on the O-ring. And it's still completely outside the diameter of the sacrificial. So when that comes off, we'll just have a perfect groove left in here for the O-ring. So we now need to continue now to turn the wings. We've got to continue. We now know where we want to start our shape for the bowl here, and then just continue to shape these wings. I've got about the diameter I want right here. I might go just a little bit less than this, but not by much. And then it's just a matter of walking these wings out to the proper thickness on here. And that's going to take a little bit of doing, so let's get to it. Now, as we get closer to the actual width that we want up here for the wings, it's very, very important that this entire section through here be straight and parallel to the front. If we get any kind of angle on this piece, if it toes in or toes out, it's going to have an effect on the width, excuse me, the width of the wing from corner to corner. And what we want is for the wing from corner to corner to be exactly the same thickness. And that's not going to happen unless this entire line through here is straight and parallel to the front. So I can't overstress that enough. It's something you're going to have to watch and watch closely as we turn. We're at about 5/8 of an inch now, so we got a little bit more to go, but not a whole lot. So we're going to have to finalize our shape on the bottom and get exactly what we want to see on the bottom as we progress through this. I need to cut in the diameter right here at the sacrificial a little bit more. We need a nice curve as the bottom of the bowl transitions into the wing. And to do that, I need to be a little bit further back. So we'll start again and thin this down. Now, we've straightened up the bottom quite a bit, got rid of most of the tool marks. So we just need to very carefully now finish out this wing. And we'll keep working on that until we get it exactly right. Okay, I believe I'm there. We have the wings about the thickness that I want, and they appear to be fairly straight. So I'm going to go ahead and sand, particularly the wings, and I'll go ahead and sand this portion of the bowl as well. So the entire bottom of the bowl is done. And then we'll turn it around and we'll turn the inside. Now, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty sure it's going to show up just right. The downside of using sacrificials on a square edge bowl is you can't actually see the wing. When you do this without a sacrificial, you can actually see the entire flat side of the wing, and you can see if there's any difference in the width from one corner to the other. Here it's a little bit harder. So I'm going to go ahead and sand it. There's no sense in leaving the camera on while I do that. And we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, we have our bottom finished. We're completely sanded. We have our O-ring groove. I'm very sure that my wings are going to be okay. That they will be the same width all the way across from corner to corner. So we're actually ready to take our blank off the chuck and turn it around and start turning the inside. Okay, we're all positioned up and we're ready to start. The very first thing I want to do is get the top of these wings cleaned up. We've got some glue, and of course it's not very smooth. We just want to make a pull cut all the way across here and level this out. So it's going to match the bottom, and we'll keep these wings straight across. What I'm going to do first, before I try to straighten up these wings, is I'm going to take out, maybe a ½ an inch of material in here and get this out of the way, and then I'll have less to deal with on the wings. So we'll proceed with that. We'll start with a bow gouge. Now, a lot of you may have had trouble trying to start into a bowl because your tool would run back across the face and really mess things up. The reason it does that is your bevel was not perpendicular to your work. So you need that perpendicular when you start, and have the flute very closed. And then you can start in at this point and then swing the handle around here and then go to the center. So you can remove the material, but the important thing is that you start at the right position and you keep that bevel engaged for support. Now there's another way to start this too that's a little bit safer. If you'll take your parting tool and just start a cut with the parting tool. Now that gives you a place to anchor your bow gouge until you get started. Now I started well in, and I have to look at the outside to see what my wall thickness is going to be. Now I'm going to take that down just a little bit more. Now I can refine that later, but now I've got this reduced to where I'm only dealing with a much smaller amount of wood rather than trying to do the whole thing. So I think I'll be able to flatten these wings a little bit better. And then that'll give me my final sanding on the wings. Now the only other thing I need to do is simply hollow the bowl out. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper in here to maybe 1 inch, and then I'll gauge my wall thickness and I'll see how far I've got to come out this way to get the wall thickness that I'm looking for. But I need to get that a little bit deeper so I can safely find my wall thickness. Now, since my wall is pretty much straight right in here, and I've got, probably about 3/8 of an inch in there, I can actually use a parting tool to back this up. And that's about what I'm looking for my wall thickness. So it's just a matter now of going ahead and hollowing this thing out. Now, when it comes to hollowing it out, you need to be able to know how deep you need to be going. So my overall depth here is about 2 7/8. Now I want to leave about a ½ inch on the bottom. So if I subtract ½ inch from the 2 7/8, then I'm at, that would be, what would that be, about 2 3/8. So as soon as I'm at 2 3/8 in depth, then I'll know to stop. So it's just a matter of taking the bowl gouge now and just remove all of that material. And I have to be careful that I follow the outside contour so I maintain the same wall thickness throughout. Okay, I'm at about 2 1/8, so I'm going to have to start slowing down and making sure that everything is nice and clean. Now that's pretty much where I'm going to quit. The rest of the inside of this is just sanding. So I am going to take a minute to show you how I sand the inside of a bowl. And I don't do it by hand, and I don't use one of the the rotation-driven sanding pad things. I use a drill motor. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the next segment. Okay, now what I have is a 3-inch diameter foam pad sanding disc. It's just in a drill motor. The problem when you're sanding the bottom of a bowl by hand, it has a tendency to hump in the center. And a lot of people have realized that, and they get this hump in the middle, and they keep sanding, and they think they'll sand away the hump, and they don't. The hump they keep getting deeper, and the hump stays the same. The reason for that is the actual lineal speed that this thing is rotating. When it makes one revolution on the outside, it's going much faster than the portion in the center. For instance, this is about 12 inches. So you multiply that by pi and you come up with a little bit better than 3 feet. So every time this rotates, it's moved linearly 3 feet. Now, on the inside, here, that's only about 1 inch in diameter. So this is only moving 3 inches in the same revolution. So the further out you get from the center, the more material your sandpaper is going to remove, because it's more wood is going past it in each revolution. So when you try to sand out that hump, it's never going to work. The hump is going to stay, and you're just going to keep getting deeper and deeper. So what I use is this thing. When the piece is rotating and the drill is rotating in the opposite direction, then it can take out the hump in the middle, and you get a nice flat bottom. And now I'm ready to start working on the sides, because my bottom is now flat. So to do that, I just tilt this up on edge, so it's running around the edge, and it will follow the contour of my turning. The thing you do have to be careful of is getting this too hot. This is hook and loop paper, and the hooks on the sanding disc are plastic. And if you generate enough heat, which is very easy to do as you're sanding, if you get carried away and stay in there too long, and this gets hot, it will literally melt the hooks off your sanding disc, and then you get to pay $12 and buy another one. So don't stay in that long, and check it. If you can put your hand on it and it's too hot to keep your hand on it, then you have gotten it too hot. So I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera, and we'll get all of this sanded out, and then we'll look at the next step. Okay, we've got it sanded, and we're now pretty much finished with the bowl. There's only a couple of things left that we need to do, and that's to get rid of the sacrificial on the back and to get rid of the sacrificials on the front. Other than that, we're pretty much done, and I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. So, our next step is going to be to cut this sacrificial off. And there's several different ways that you can do that. There's plenty of room in here. You've got over almost 3/8 of an inch. where you could run a parting tool in here and take that off. You could, you know, and any number of ways that you could get rid of it. You probably know more than I do about it. But I use a jig, and I realize that probably nobody else watching the video has one like it. But I think I'm going to cut this off using the jig, and then you can at least see another way to do it. So it's done with the piece on the chuck. So we're going to leave it on the chuck, and then we'll cut it off. And let me get that set up, and I'll be right back. Okay, now this is my sled. It has an adjustable part that runs back and forth so I can line up where I want to cut with my blade. It has a threaded section in the front that the chuck just screws on. And now I can set this up to where I'm passing very, very close to where I want to cut. So I've got a minimum of material left on the blank. I built this jig several years ago when I started making the magic things, and magic things that I make are essentially just fancy lidded boxes. But it was so much easier for me to cut them off on here than it was to do it any other way. And since I make so many of them, it was worth the time and effort to build this jig. But it will cut very close, within about 10 or 12 thousandths of where I want to be. So I don't have to remove a great deal of material from the bottom of it by hand. So all I have to do now is to simply run this all the way through, and it will separate the bowl from the sacrificial. As you can see in here, you can actually see some walnut through most of the cut. So there's very little of that sacrificial left to take off by hand. And then all I have to do now is remove the sacrificials off the bowl blank, and I have a square edge bowl. So let me set that up, and I will show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay, now we're ready to just actually cut off the sacrificials with the bandsaw. Now I'm not going to try to take it right up to the walnut. I'm going to leave a little bit, and then I'll sand that part of it off. Now, as you can see, we still have a little bit of the sacrificial, but not very much. So it's going to be a fairly simple thing then just to sand this off on my edge sander. And I'll set it for that and show you that in just a moment. Okay, now we're at the edge sander. Normally I would turn on the dust collector, but it makes an awful lot of noise, and so does the sander itself. But hopefully you can see what I'm going to do here. Now, you can see we have removed all of the sacrificial. All we have to do is do the finished sanding on that, and we have a square edge bowl without having to turn air. And if you can look down, you can see I missed it just a little bit. The outer edges are a little bit thicker than the inside, but not by much. So there it is. All I have to do left is to do the final sanding and take off that little bit of the sacrificial off there, and it's ready to finish. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to spray it with a lacquer and then polish it.